got it.
Got it. You got it?
I've got it. Recording is in progress. This is an in media res start to the taped discussion between Nikita Gale, famed artist and lesbian.
Yes.
And Mandy Harris Williams, emerging artist and lesbian.
Pop star.
You too.
Pop stars in conversation.
Pop stars in conversation, just like Interview Magazine.
Oh my God, I thought of that too. I was like, yeah.
Iconoclasts.
Yes. Okay, the lesbian thing, or like the pronoun thing. For me, I go back and forth because basically what I say is, like for anything that's text-based and public-facing, so like press releases, any kind of writing about my work, especially the work specifically, I just tell people don't use pronouns at all. Just like don't use pronouns. But then if we're just like in conversation or it's like a social setting, I'm like, use she, her, or they. Like that doesn't bother me, but like she, her, or the pronouns. I know like saying preferred pronouns is not a thing anymore, but she, her are like my pronouns that I would go by.
Yeah.
But it's like kind of confusing for people sometimes, even though I feel like I state it as clearly as possible. It's just like, yeah, in writing, just don't use, it's like gendered pronouns are also just not specific enough. In a sense, like if you're talking about me, just use my name or some variation of my name, or like the artist or something that's more specific. You know what I mean?
That's giving great migrational.
Oh,
who is her?
Oh, it is her. Oh my God.
I definitely feel like I've gotten checked by my parents for like using imprecise pronouns.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Like it's an affront.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I feel like I had a cousin who would say, he would always just use one version of a pronoun. So instead of going between like she, her, hers, she would always just use one of the words. I can't remember which one. Maybe it was her.
Ooh.
She would never say she or her. She would always just say her.
I have heard that developmental language too, like him is, her is, ongoing verb.
I like it. It's like minimalism.
I like it. I like it. Minimalism.
Right? You're just like, you just need one.
Let's make this real simple.
Yeah. Yeah. It's about the form.
Well, speaking of form, you've got me thinking about the ruin a lot.
Okay.
The last several months.
Yeah.
And for the folks out there, what are we trying to premiere in 2024, 2025? Ruin Travel Club.
Oh my God, yes.
Last time we were talking, we were talking about like the material and social implications of the ruin, and you told me to read Song of Solomon, which fucked me right up.
Yes. Yeah.
Also, that scene is so small, but it is so.
It's so like, I went back, maybe it was like last week or 2 weeks ago, and like read the Cersei scene, and it's funny because in my memory, like when I think when I recall novels, it's sort of like in my memory, the story sort of progresses chronologically. So, you know, in Song of Solomon, like we have no idea Cersei even really existed until the book's almost
Right.
over. But then she shows up and she's like, oh yeah, I've been here the whole time.
Yeah.
Like hiding the kids and living in this ruin for, it seemed like she'd been there for like 100 years or something.
Yeah, she's not bound by age.
No.
Um, Toni Morrison does this wild ass fucking, Toni, I feel like Toni Morrison in that book is just fucking with us the entire time. The least reliable narrator.
Oh yeah. Oh my God. Yes.
Like the narrator is a character. Like the narrator is not omniscient. The narrator is biased
Oh, for sure.
and untrustworthy.
Yeah. I mean, I love it. It's so great.
Absolutely.
I mean,
I don't
yeah. Oh, wait, finish your thought.
No, you, please.
Well, I was just thinking about like that idea of the unreliable narrator, because in jazz, like the narration in that book is, it's like way more intentional. Like you feel way more of aware of the fact that like there's just a completely decentered perspective that's being shared, because each chapter is being told from a different, always unidentified person, but it's always some figure that's somewhere on the periphery of the story. Sometimes they feel like they're more in the mix, but each chapter kind of goes between these different voices who never identify themselves. So that like Song of Solomon, like that unreliable narrator, I feel sometimes it becomes more pronounced.
Yeah.
But I really like that.
I'm about to get into Sula next.
Oh my God.
But I have been revisiting this one, Playing in the Dark, which is Whiteness and the Literary Imagination, and based off I don't know if it's the exact transcript, but based off of, or a transcript of a series of lectures that Morrison gave, I think maybe 93, 94 at Harvard. I love a book that's a lecture.
Me too. Because they just, the language flows really differently too. It's so nice.
It does.
Yeah.
But I think something that's funny about thinking about this book and tracing narration stylistics throughout Morrison's work is that it engages the idea that Blackness is an imagination within a Black voice.
Oh, yeah. I like that.
And I'm just coming upon that thought now. I want to pivot into a shitty question. Now I'm going to be a shitty narrator. In your work, Nikita, are you a reliable narrator?
Oh no, I'm extremely unreliable. I'm so unreliable. I feel like so much of the work is just about how unreliable I am as a narrator, but also how unreliable you are as the viewer or the one who's experiencing the work. It's like the structures, this I feel like is one of the reasons why I really am excited for us to be having this conversation, because like I'm really interested in those structures that kind of determine who gets to look and who is being looked at. And I'm also interested in like looking at how unstable those structures can be, and how like whatever we see or think of as stability is actually just a product of something just being repeated over and over again, or like agreements that people have made with each other to continue looking at something in the same way over and over again until it starts to take on the shape of like a stable structure.
Right. You were
Yeah.
talking about, you were mentioning a word earlier in our conversation. It might have been before we started taping. It might not have been. To me, it registered as legibility, but that's not the term you're using.
Mm. Oh, what was the
Like,
term?
were you saying identifiability, or that wasn't
Maybe
it?
it was God, it wasn't legibility. I feel like I use that word a lot. I might use it too much.
I love that word.
Oh my God, wait. Legibility, illegibility,
Oh no, I've stumped us.
legibility. Hold on, now I got a riff. Ah, was it something about register? Sometimes I use that word.
It might have been that. I feel like it
Because I
had
think,
an ability at the end of it, but that also could be because like
oh,
how I heard it,
yeah.
speaking of the unreliability of the form.
But
And
yes. But like this is also how like conversations happen. I love like sometimes when I hear songs, like how when you mishear lyrics, but sometimes the thing that you thought you heard is more interested than the original lyric.
yeah, there's a lot of those that I hold so dear from childhood.
Oh yeah.
And I don't aim to correct myself.
You don't need to, because that's like ingrained, that's emotional.
Yeah. It's how it was learned. That's how I know it.
Uh-huh.
That's the way my heart is activated.
I love it.
That was the resonance that met me at the
Yeah. Oh yeah.
um you and your unreliability as a narrator,
Mhm.
and speaking of like this idea of how things are kind of like legible per retellings and agreements, gets back to this theme of the ruin. um
Yeah.
I'll disclose the details of the 2025 Ruin Travel Club for those at home. Um, this will be a travel club whereby your faithful leaders, Nikita Gale and Mandy Harris Williams, will take you on an international tour of ruins, and we will reconstruct these ruins with their untold histories, which could potentially be are necessarily intrinsically woven with their currentness or currencies.
Uh-huh. Oh yeah. That's really good. It's good that we're recording this because then we can transcribe that for the website.
Yeah. I want it to be very, very early HTML. Like it should look like it's from 98. Just
Oh
like,
yeah. Like maybe your credit card information might be stolen just from looking at it,
ooh,
But
ooh,
like we'll get you there.
instabilities, right?
Yes.
Structural instabilities abound.
Exactly.
Um, tell me, well, no, I've heard this before, but tell the folks at home a little bit about how you're thinking about ruin, or how you were thinking about ruin as you prepared for your latest show, which you had up at 52 Walker.
Yeah. I was thinking about like, okay, to start, let me backtrack a little bit. So I have always had a real fascination with just material culture and the histories of materials. So when I was in college, I studied archaeology. I later, like the very last semester of school, got really lazy and overwhelmed and switched to anthropology because I just had to write a paper instead of do like a whole fieldwork project. But my interest was in archaeology, so like physical history, ruins, the things that get left behind. And one of the things that I always found really sort of frustrating, or that felt like it was not broadly acknowledged in a way that made the field feel productive for me, like the field of archaeology, is that there wasn't always like a really clear acknowledgement of just how unreliable and speculative the whole project was.
Right.
So always these ways, like these moves to add some kind of like quantitative, specific, reliable data to what materials were being found. So like I did carbon dating, and you do a lot of like, you know, visual and material matching to sort of say that materials came from the same place, possibly, or came from the same batch. Like usually ceramics are the thing that lasts the longest. And that interest like continued, like as I became an artist. Like I worked as a music photographer for a little while between undergrad and like living in Atlanta, and then eventually going to grad school. But all of that's to say that like this idea of the ruin has continued, like more recently has started to crop up more specifically in my work. And for me, it's like this idea of ruin, it's not just material, you know, it's also ideological and psychological. Like what are the possibilities of like what a ruin might look like if we think about like ideologies or ideas or concepts that maybe are no longer useful, that are no longer like activated by regular use, but they're these kinds of things that we get to collectively look back at as like, oh, like, remember when we used to use that thing? We don't use it anymore, but we acknowledge that it still like exists, even if it's just like a point of reference. And that's also how like physical ruins function, right? There's sort of these things, these materials that are allowed to persist because a collective group or society has decided these are significant. We don't want to destroy or like erase these materials. We want to be kind of reminded of them, even if it's just in the interest of like educating, of looking back and remembering or recalling what we don't want to repeat, or remembering and recalling something that like points to, I think about this a lot in terms of like ruins you might kind of encounter in like Western Europe as these materials that kind of point to or reify this idea of like a kind of cultural supremacy. Really.
It's funny, the idea of use, because even as you're saying, you know, we are not, this idea of the ideological non-use of, you know, whatever even that ruin like symbolizes, right? Like a dynasty or a moment in cultural history. But the desire to preserve, which is another loaded
that word. Let me write that down because I want to ask you about that word.
I have all of our notes from last time here. I'm gonna remind you of one after you ask. But okay, for better or for worse, the desire to preserve kind of implies heavy usage, right? And it's kind of interesting thinking about, you know, just the apparent architecture that's within your installation work, and even you know, strategies backslash flourishes such as like metal etching, right? Or etching words in metal, like the like use non-use gap, like this is not the most useful way to write something.
Right. Yeah, no, totally.
But here it is in a way that, like, you know, this metal will last longer than the paper that we print it on or distribute it through. Or like, you know, these very familiar objects, not here presented in ruin or destruction or simulated ruin,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
are, you know, like we can identify the use, but you're not gonna use it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I would like to see you try to.
It's like, you could try. Yeah. No, I have a lot of thoughts about that. I mean, I can talk about the pieces like the body print works, which are kind of like these aluminum drawings that are vertical. And like one of the major thoughts that I had about just like how I was making that work was this idea of the absence of material, or how materials and like surfaces of materials get etched or excavated. There's this kind of removal process that implies presence, you know, without, like in the absence of a figure, we often are given or provided with this idea that something was there because of what it's removed.
What a relief.
What a relief. I love that. What a relief. Yeah. So that's kind of like how I was thinking about those works. And of course, thinking of just like, you know, ancient caves from like I think the oldest one is like 200,000 years ago, like the first like handprints that are just these, you know, it's like this over painting, and then, you know, the surface that wasn't covered by paint leaves the shape of the hand. And so there are these sort of like funny relationships, I think, to presence that come out in those works, or at least those were some of the ideas that were guiding my thinking there. Yeah.
I'm reading, oh God, I should actually look at the book title.
I do that too, where I'm like, what is it?
Something about mud and a lotus. Let's see. Mud, lotus.
Like that. That sounds good.
No Mud, No Lotus.
No mud.
The Art of Transforming Suffering.
Oh. Okay.
I'm gonna fuck up pronunciation here, but I'm gonna do my best. By Thich Nhat Hanh, who
yeah, Thich Nhat Hanh.
Thich Nhat Hanh, thank you.
Yeah. Who recently died, right?
Yeah, I think that did happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Because
like to speak to the point.
Yeah.
Did he die?
Good point.
What is death?
What is death?
Because I guess the point I was going to bring up is that, and this has to do with relief, presence, non-presence, CRC.
Yeah, preservation.
Oof.
Let's not lose that word.
Oh, no. We've got it right here in a different color.
Yeah.
But in this book, there is this offering which suggests that like while we feel we are living, like each second we are living, we are dying. Which I was like, oh, okay, heavy, easy.
Yeah.
I appreciated that conversation, that handheld of what a life lived is, you know. It's and the idea of not fearing death, I think was kind of the reason for offering that in that space particularly, but it also, it makes me think so many things. One, about the nature of, you know, relief, the nature of life itself, of the ruin too. And I think about like, are ruins like in some way to like a gift that is like it's almost like a social gift of like don't be afraid to die.
Yeah, I really love that. I love it because like with the installations, it's also about like the gift of like allowing someone to experience the possibility, like a realized possibility of something, you know. And I
I would
think
love
about
to
this a
know,
lot with, oh, sorry, what was that?
I would love to know more about what you mean by realized possibility, if you could recall
Yeah,
for a second.
um, almost like a demonstration,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where you're kind of, um, like I really believe in the power of just enactment. Sometimes of sort of like working through an example of a possible
Mm,
outcome.
mm,
And I'm going to shout out my therapist for a minute. So I do this kind of therapy. It's called narrative psychotherapy. And it's about like basically looking at or thinking about these kinds of narratives that we construct for ourselves. And that often happens, it typically happens just through like the process of accumulating stories and compiling evidence that
mm-hmm.
then just like naturally often leads us to want to make conclusions about who we are and like helps us sort of devise these ideas about who we think we are as subjects.
Mm,
And often they're just like not accurate,
mm,
but like it's very easy to sort of like build up these narratives by saying like, oh, I closed the door again, I guess I'm just a door closer, when
right,
really it's like maybe you just closed a door, maybe you've
right,
done it like a couple times, maybe you
right,
just like have to do it because the door needs to be closed. It doesn't make
right,
you
right.
a chronic door. Does that make sense? That was a really bad
No, no,
example.
no,
I'm
no. I think
so
it's a
bad
great
at
example.
analogies.
I thought
um
I thought it was a great example.
yeah, yeah, but like it's like that power of just like demonstration. Like this is something that also just I can think of very specific examples of like when I experience artworks, right? And I have this experience of feeling like I've been allowed or authorized to do something.
Mm,
Like a couple of months ago, I saw this really incredible Jason Moran performance in LA. And it was like one of those experiences where you see someone doing something and you're just like, oh, we can go there.
mm-hmm.
We can do that. That's fucking cool. I didn't even think of that.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's like that idea. I think like applying that idea of like ruining or destroying, and not necessarily thinking of that as something that's violent, but just another way of working with a structure or working through a structure
Mm-hmm.
is like kind of the frequency that I'm on. Because
Mm-hmm.
there's all this conversation you don't know about like abolishing structures, like tearing everything down, getting rid of stuff. But it's like, yeah, but when you destroy something, something is remaining, even if it's just the empty space that it once occupied.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's kind of like, what do we do with that space? What do we do with those materials? Like they could be turned into something that creates a completely different like set of relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I kind of went off there.
I asked.
You asked me, but like this, but I want to like ask you about like, again, it's like this word preservation, it like really activated something in my mind, especially in terms of just your relationship, like thinking about your relationship to images specifically, and like thinking through pop culture in the way that the preservation of like appearances and images operates like in that. I don't even know it's like operates in that field. It feels like field is a good word because I'm like obsessed with pop. Cool. I mean, like pop music specifically. That's a whole other thing, but like, yeah, like maybe I'm not very good at asking questions, but I like throwing out prompts. So maybe the question's like, what do you like? What are the thoughts that come up for you with that term preservation? I'm sorry.
I think about I think that there's like the preface to preservation is the first thing that comes to mind. So like the right to be preserved. I do a lot of things, or a lot of my public performance and honestly like interpersonal, social, you know, sense of humor has to do with like, I have a right to do this, so I'm going to do it. And I think preservation and image preservation show up there big time. In my personal field, I've like made a lot of posts on social media, but I recently took a lot of them down because I felt an opposite preservation instinct, which was like, I am preserving myself for myself. So I think there's like, again, the question of audience of like preserved by whom and for whom. And you know, it makes me think too, it makes me think about the right to preservation. I grew up taking a African American and African history pride course. Like I did just like a cultural weekend school, which culminated in a trip to Egypt. So there was it was a Hotep embedded curriculum, and so we learned about when Napoleon shot off the nose of the Sphinx, which like is a history. I don't know if it's the history. Like every history is a history.
Right, for sure.
I don't believe in the capital THE, capital H history.
Unreliable narrators once again.
Precisely. But I gravitate towards that. I accept that history. I gravitate towards that history. I will retell that history with less contextualization others. It makes me think about or even, you know, like a place I just went, and I'm glad that I can bring this in now because I was going to talk about it for another reason. I just went to Mexico City for the first time, and I was in I'm sleep deprived, so I have really bad titular recall these days, but park, big ass park in the middle of the city, and there's this area kind of behind the castle in the middle of the park, and if you're walking down, you've come from like the industrial hotel area and you're walking down into the park, and then you would come across you would pass the Contemporary Art Museum on your right, you would walk straight, you would keep going, you would get to the castle, and then if you go left at the castle, instead of like, here's like the entrance to the castle, if you go left there's kind of like a less dense area that is still like archaeologically valuable. And there were like some ancient etchings there, and they write about how you know, throughout time and, you know, different dynasties, how these are the only remaining ones because, you know, well, I mean, one of the big things that like dictators like to do, or authoritarian leaders like to do, is destroy history, which is why I see the Napoleon story is history is viable.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
I mean, I think we're seeing that like in our own time
Oh yeah.
with the fight against critical race theory.
Oh, absolutely.
So I
Yeah.
think my feelings to put a fine point on it, and then I'm gonna dovetail out of this, connecting with these ruins in Mexico City.
Yeah.
I think my feeling about preservation is more about that embodiment and demonstration of my right to do it, and then like giving people kind of that giving like the peek into why I thought that, which is kind of like that critical performative space that I tend to work in.
Yeah.
And you know, I, being a Harlemite, just like have to do some shit. Like we are a performative people.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think there's just like this, I'm gonna do it because I have a right to do it. Here's my reasoning. Here's the logic behind it. Is a part that I like to introduce and kind of break down that narration to protagonist space.
Yeah. I like that.
But I don't even know, like I would actually love to get better at creating things that I actually want to preserve. I make things now that I feel are, I try not to be too precious about my artwork because I really am, you know what, it's 2022. I think I did the first thing that I considered art in 2018. So I really am just coming into like my feeling of like, I am an artist.
Yeah.
And so maybe there's this desire to like flirt with my right to be preserved before creating something that I actually want to preserve.
Oh yeah, that totally makes sense. What was the thing in 2018?
The first thing I did that I considered art was a talk at Hard to Read.
Okay.
At the Standard. It was about, I think the subject was body language.
Okay.
And I just like wrote this piece that felt like I'd been doing a little bit of like hot take journalism. And I actually was writing these like long form essays just for myself.
That's amazing.
And kind of figuring out where I wanted to show up as a writer. And I think that felt like art, one, because that was also the day that my first pamphlet came out, my first color values pamphlet came out.
Okay, cool.
In Third magazine. And I was like, okay, like, yeah, I do art. Like I read things that are not like a form.
Yeah.
I have ephemera.
Right. There's like the thing where you're like, oh, something's in print or it's circulating a different way.
Yeah. Which is funny and gets back to like the paper versus canvas versus metal.
Yeah.
Etching.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just felt like, okay, this is it. I'm still really proud of that talk. I still have it on YouTube.
Oh, that's great. Okay, cool. We'll make sure there's a link. Maybe they add a link to this talk.
I asked the audience to raise their hands. Like I was in a flow and they were not ready for a question, which is the perfect time to ask a question.
Yes.
And I asked the audience, like, how many of you have like even considered like being romantically or sexually involved with a woman who is as West African phenotyped as I am?
Wow.
And I remember like I kind of meant it rhetorically.
The people actually raised it.
I remember exactly who it is, but I will not name names. But this person, like, this is exactly how they raised their hand. They were like,
Oh my God.
more on that after we stop the
Whoa. Yeah. I mean, I just looked at it, I was like, I mean, should we keep going? We got how much time do we?
I think we said we would give them an hour.
An hour. Okay,
An
cool.
hour and 15 minutes
Okay.
of recording. Cool. And I think, when did we start the recording?
Maybe 12:10.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So we'll go we have another 25, 30 minutes.
Okay, cool.
You ready?
Yeah. I'm ready.
Okay. To circle back to this ruin.
Yes. Yes.
One of the things I'm interested in, I have no knowledge of this, but given your scholastic background, perhaps you have an idea. I'm inclined to believe that there are many spaces that are theaters or stages and audience corrals, we'll say, that become ruins. Here I'm thinking of the Colosseum.
Yeah.
I'm thinking also of, and now this is, speaking of preservation, when I was growing up, the Harlem Lady Jets step team used to rehearse at—
I was in a step team too in high school.
I think that there's a performance piece that—
I think there is. Oh my God, you're taking notes. You're not going to forget.
No.
I'll do it. I still remember some of that's muscle memory.
Oh yeah.
You just can't shake it.
No, you can. You can shake it, all right, but
I mean, true.
The amphitheater across the street from my house in Marcus Garvey Park was ruinous. I remember like there was kind of like very prominent tagging.
Okay.
At some point in time, white people in Harlem appeared. The Whole Foods was built.
Oh God, yeah.
The amphitheater was restored. And I'm curious, on an academic historical level, is there any oh right, okay, I'm the reason this has to do with Mexico City is because in that like back alley logical area, there's also like an amphitheater.
Oh, okay.
Which was impressive to me. I don't know why.
They're really, I mean, amphitheaters are they're really impressive. I mean, you walk in and you just, for one, just the way that sound functions in those things, even when they're completely empty, is just, they're technologically just really advanced.
Right.
I feel that has something to do with it. And also just spatially, the idea that there's like this entire structure that's sort of meant to focus potentially thousands of bodies in one particular direction. Like there's something really powerful about that.
As a performer, I simply cannot resist these spaces.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is there any weight to this idea that like there are more, or there's an over-representation? What is your sense of the representation of performance spaces as ruins?
That's a really good question. When you started describing this amphitheater to me, it just reminded me of two things actually. One was about a year, oh no, I think this is actually before the pandemic. So it might have been like my sense of time is totally warped. No, I think it was like last
Everyone.
year.
Okay.
A friend of mine was visiting family that was in kind of like a more rural part of Italy.
Mhm.
And he sent me this photograph, this beautiful, gorgeous image of this amphitheater. It was like it was like a ruin of this abandoned amphitheater that had been completely taken over by vegetation. So it was just like, you could sort of make out the seating and where the stage was, but everything was just covered in like.
Is it the one from Killing Eve?
Oh my God, I haven't seen Killing Eve. I'm
Okay.
sorry. I need to. I started watching it and then I got distracted and stopped watching it, but it was really good. I did enjoy it, but I need to
Circle back.
Yeah, I need to circle back. I need to circle back. But there are like trees growing through, trees growing through the sort of like seating area and the stage. It was just like this really gorgeous thing. And like this question of, is there any weight to this, like the investment in allowing public spaces to remain as ruins? Is that kind of what I have such a bad memory.
I would say not just public spaces, right? Because there's like the monument ruin, for instance.
Right. Yeah.
And then there's, I guess like it's interesting to think about performance space like this, right?
Yeah.
We're in an era where I'm not even certain, is it capitalism that requires that we have DIY spaces?
Oh, right. Yeah.
But coming from New York,
Yeah.
coming from, blocks from the Apollo, there is a way in which the theater automatically becomes a monument.
Yeah. Right.
Almost, and it's an interesting, when we're thinking about ruins and we're thinking about livelihood and presence, it's interesting how the container functions almost as a stand-in for the ephemerality of what happens in that space.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's almost like this kind of marker, right? It's like a space where everybody agrees to acknowledge it's like the space where a particular kind of thing happens. Like, to go there for this specific thing. Like, there's this area in London called Speaker's Corner that is, it's like, a real, like legit public square. And it's been in London for centuries. And many like famous, like I can't name any, but like just like my understanding of the history of the space is that like many like famous political speeches, in the context of the UK were given in the space. People continue to kind of, speak publicly in the space, and it's all kinds of speeches that people do. So like the times that I've been there've been like, extremely conservative, like right-wing kind of stuff, like religious speeches, demonstrations, protests, like all kinds of things happen in this space. And there's nothing especially significant spatially about the space. There's like a little kind of pavilion, but it's, from what I can remember, it's like flat. So people just sort of like stand and listen or experience like performances. There's also music performances, like musicians will perform there. But yeah, I feel like there is something about this idea of not just like the relationship between performances and spaces, but also like some idea of the public or what it means to be like a member of a public or to be addressing a public, and how often like there are these like spaces that sort of join those ideas, like the individual to the masses or something, like that becomes some part of it that feels related to this idea of these specific sites where that happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny because there are also there's so many places that people, or that, gosh, is it planners, is it cultures who are,
Right.
placing these monument theaters,
Yeah.
squares, wherever.
Yeah.
With the Marcus Garvey amphitheater, it was kind of like you had to know about it for a while.
Okay. Yeah.
They do like these jazz in the park events all
Okay.
throughout public parks in New York City.
Yeah.
But ours was never really that well attended until I
Hmm.
left for college, and then I came back and I was like, oh, this is
Huh.
really happening in a new way.
Yeah.
Um, but it's actually behind our like recreation center.
Okay.
You can't even really see it.
Oh.
And the recreation center is like horrible. It's a very ugly,
Oh,
like,
like,
city rec center building.
right. Right.
And there was something that felt so hidden about it, even though it was very obviously like public.
Right.
And this is a side note. Ironically, they used to have like these dog fights
Oh.
in the amphitheater, so everybody could hear when the dog fights were happening. And it's like, there is nothing private about the way that you are doing this very illegal thing. If
Yeah.
anything, you were doing it on a stage.
Yeah. Because that was the thing too about like amphitheaters, right? Or these like outdoor spaces, is that there's this like projection that happens where like the sound lets you know something's happening even if
Yeah.
you can't see it, which is a sort of like a funny kind of real-time broadcasting.
Absolutely.
Like I
Yeah.
live not too far from there's like a high school stadium about a mile north of me, like a football field.
Uh-huh.
And so sometimes I can hear, like when there's a game, I can hear
Right.
like crowd sort of screaming. So I know something's happening.
Roars.
Yeah, yeah, right.
There's also a type of monument where, for instance, thinking about someplace like Egypt, for instance, where it's like very specific where things are. Like the sun shines here on these days, and that's why this thing is here.
Yeah.
There's the Mexico City amphitheater I was looking at is kind of built into kind of like the rock that the castle will eventually like kind of sit on top of. So it's there's like a, what do I mean, just geological reason, I guess, for it to be placed there.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to think about, like, I guess, like, particularly like the British strength of being able to say a flat space is a special place.
Yeah, no, totally. It's like, this is what it is. And people agree that this is what it is. And they continue to agree until maybe some other group of people that comes into power, has some sway, agrees that it's not the place anymore. Which is also this thing, like in thinking about spaces where performances are like allowed to take place, or like I like to use the word authorization. I think there's something about that term that's like, it's kind of forensic, but it also covers a lot of ground. And so like there's this idea of like, like Marcus Garvey amphitheater pre Whole Foods, white people renovation. That was a site for events to happen because a community of people decided that it was a significant space. And that's sort of like, and like continuing to decide and agree that that's the space where these things take place is what sort of maintained that relationship to the space.
Right.
And like, there's also this idea that like, these spaces where performances take place, or these spaces where certain events take place, are like, they take on the form of the values and the interests of the people who are occupying them or using them as well.
Mm.
And so like, yeah, maybe there was graffiti and all this other stuff on the spaces because that's like a language or a register that resonates for the people who are using that space at the time, or like who found value in the space.
I think that there were, I mean, I just the part of Harlem that I grew up in is a very strange area.
Okay.
Because Marcus Garvey Park, if you're going up Fifth, if you're going down Fifth Avenue rather, you're on Fifth Avenue until 125th, and then you kind of bow out to go around the park, and that's Marcus Garvey Park. Everything has to be below a certain height in that area. And you have kind of like these old time artsy bougie communities. You also have Section 8 housing. Section 8 housing as distinct, I want to be clear, from like the projects, right? Like a larger you know, multiple building structure.
Right.
So it was very economically diverse, not quite so culturally diverse.
Okay.
In the way that like a lot of what makes a New Yorker is a Harlemite, but it's not acknowledged.
Okay.
Claiming it here.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, I did not know until Questlove's film was released, but this was the site of Black Woodstock.
Oh, really? Oh my God, that's right. Yeah, it was Marcus Garvey Park.
And we
Such a good film.
have know that it may be a part of like the lexicon of the space now, and it may be acknowledged in some way, but you know, speaking to the idea even more of the ruin and the ideology and like the value, like all these things that can fade besides just the physical presence, or like the, you know, the history, the I don't want to say ideology, but it does have to do with what you were saying earlier about like the import of that symbol, you know, had been completely washed away. We had no idea.
Yeah. That was, it's like this moment where you're just sometimes so shocked by the realization that there is this history or this thing that happened here, and you've just been walking it or over it or doing something else in the space because it's taken on a different shape.
I want to ask you a question.
Okay.
Two-parter.
Okay.
What is your favorite acknowledged ruin? And what is your favorite unacknowledged ruin?
I had this show that was up at CAM, California African American Museum. And it was called Private Dancer. And it was this ruin of like stage trusses and lighting, and the lights corresponded to Tina Turner's Private Dancer album. But everything was silent. So all you heard is just the sound of the lights moving. And there was this program that we organized for the show. And it was a conversation between me, Maureen Mann, Daphne Brooks, and Gale Wald. We're all music historians, music theorists. And Gale Wald wrote kind of like the, you know, official biography of Sister Rosetta Tharpe. And somewhere near the end of the conversation, we started talking about ruins. And Gail said this thing where she kind of insinuated or suggested, she's like, you know, maybe rock and roll as a genre is a kind of ruin. I've been thinking a lot about genres and just sort of like the kind of like history of genre and categorization, specifically in the context of like popular music, is just having extremely like racist colonial origins in terms of how Black music is always categorized in those systems. And so she said this thing about, yeah, like maybe rock and roll is a kind of ruin as a genre now. It's like no longer a useful category. And so that feels like my like meta ruin
I love it.
answer, but that one's like really that just like really sticks out to me.
Yeah.
And then my unacknowledged ruin, I haven't thought about this in a while, but so I was born in Anchorage, Alaska. My dad is in the Air Force, but both of my parents are from the South. So my dad's from Alabama. My mom is from Central Georgia. And my mother's parents lived in Gray, this town called Gray, Georgia, that's just outside of Macon, Georgia.
Mhm.
And my grandparents lived in like a very rural area. So they had like a good amount of land. There's like, it's Georgia, so it's really like lush and humid and everything's really green. And there's kudzu everywhere. And my grandfather was really into fixing cars, and he was really into buying junk cars. And so at the time of his death, there were something like 200 cars on his property. But when I was a kid with my cousins, when I was like 8 or 9, like I would go there for the summers. And my cousins and I, at this time, like I'm one of the eldest cousins, and there were maybe like 4 of us, all girls. And we would play these imaginary games with the cars. So like the cars, these like fucked up ruined cars with like, you know, doors missing. Like some of them were like really old, like cars from the 1920s, 30s. But we would like turn them into these like spaces where we would just imagine like, oh, this is a kitchen or this is a store, or we'd pretend to be driving some of the cars. We could do that.
Mhm.
And so those were definitely, it was like a kind of ruin, like in a type of ruin that I feel is like specific to a very, very rural, like American, like, I mean, in that area too, like a Black Southern aesthetic. So that feels like like my like secret ruin that I had memories of. It's like these cars.
What is the state of that ruin today?
They've all been removed basically when he died. Like my uncles just cleared the whole space out. But it's funny because like if you look up satellite images, like old Google satellite images, there are a couple where you can still see all
Oh
the
my
cars on the
God.
property. And it's just like they just fill, it's like the full perimeter of this property is just, it's like almost entirely lined with cars.
I would love to see that.
Yeah, I'll find a picture and send it to you. Yeah.
I was supposed to remind you of the refusal to refurbish.
Oh my God. Yes. Oh my God. The refusal to refurbish. The feminine urge to refurbish. The feminine urge to refuse to refurbish.
Duality, if I ever.
The duality. Sometimes you just gotta let it ride. I mean, that was Cersei's whole deal with the, I mean, that's the thing too with the Cersei character, is just this like interspecies relationship to ruin too. Right? Like with the dogs, like that's also something that I could go on about forever. Like one, I'm obsessed with dogs, and that scene of just her in this house, not refurbishing, but taking so much pleasure in just watching the dogs carry out, like take on the shape and form of her resentment and desire to just see the structure totally destroyed. there's something really just provocative about that figure to me. I'm like, yeah, like that's what I want. Like the dogs don't care.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Thinking
But
about Circe, how we even get into that situation.
yeah. Oh, right. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
do we come across do we have to go through like like a stream, and then we come out? Is that when that happens, or is that
Yeah. Like, what has to happen? Sometimes it's just like, I mean, I almost think it's like some kind of ideological shift.
that stream
Because
is an
the
ideological
stream, yeah,
shift? It's a
yeah,
time space shift.
for sure. Yeah,
Loss of, like, injury that doesn't hurt, like,
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah,
then loss of money, like what I think,
yeah, yeah.
loss of cigarettes, right?
Right, yeah.
Old comforts, old values.
Right, yeah. Yeah, it's the classic, like you have to lose. I mean, this is reminding me, it's like the hero's journey. Like I
Mhm.
recently rewatched, I mean, I've seen Set It Off like 8 million times at this
Oh my
point,
gosh,
but they recently added it, Delta added it to their in-flight movies, and I freaked the fuck out. I was like, I'm watching this right now. I don't care.
I've never seen it.
Oh my, okay, we have to.
I'm afraid of violence. Like, it's difficult for me.
Okay, yeah, it's a very violent movie.
I'm also, yeah, I like suspense fucks me up.
Okay, okay, yeah,
And I know it's gonna be really involved. Like,
really involved. Is this
maybe
like
I
a
would love to
90s?
do a screening, honestly,
Oh my
in say a safe space screening.
God. Okay, we should do that. I just invited myself to but like safe space screening. Set it off.
I had already drawn up the flyer wherein you were co-hosting, so I'm
Wait, can we
glad
really
you're
do that?
invited now. Let's
Can
do
we
it.
really do that? We should do that.
We're doing it.
Okay, I want to do that.
Writing it right under performance
Yeah.
step routine.
Yes. Performance step routine. Set it off screening. But it's such a perfect. It's like a perfect action movie, a perfect bank heist film, for sure the best bank heist film.
Yeah, were you about to reveal a spoiler in your analysis?
I was about to go into some detail about one of my favorite film scenes of all time, but I'm not going to do it.
I recently met with an artist who spoiled a lot of it. Not gonna
Oh, oh. Did they say who dies?
Yeah. Wait, I don't know how many people die, but I know at least one person who dies because of my demographic. Everybody wants to tell me.
Oh, yeah. I mean, but like that is one of the best characters ever created in cinema.
I'm really excited to watch it.
Like that character, God, Cleo.
Okay, everybody stay tuned for
Everyone stay tuned. Yeah.
screening.
Yeah. Stay tuned for the screening.
For the travel club screening.
Travel club screening.
And
Refusal to
step two.
refurbish.
We are coming up on the last 5 minutes of our discussion.
Yeah.
So I want to do some synthesizing.
Okay.
You talked about, we were talking about ruins that like aren't there.
Yeah.
Either because they're unacknowledged or because, you know, they're like, there's a almost a, it's funny because at the same time that saying something is a ruin implies that it has degraded from you know, its initial prestige. There's
Yeah.
also just in acknowledging it, a levity, a glamorization,
Yeah. Like the framing.
and I am. It made me think when, you know, as we're synthesizing all of these ideas about presence, non-presence, the ruin. It made me think about how perspective plays a role in the ruin.
Yeah.
One could say that the ruin is 100% perspective.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And it makes me, you know, when I think about perspective and art, I think about light
Mm-hmm.
and how light moves through a ruin.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that.
When you are in your latest, you spoke to how in Private Dancer, the lights moved through the space, coordinated, synchronized to Private Dancer. But
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you could, regarding angle and distance, and in a real physical way, give us a little bit more of an idea of how that choreography works.
Yeah. Yeah. So when I spend a lot of time like looking at stage design, looking at the ways that sets are designed to amplify not just like visually what you are seeing, but also the idea of the body and the performer, right? So it's like the lights are simultaneously shining and spotlighting this performing figure, but there are also these things that are happening on the stage that sort of amplify that experience and frame that performance on stage. And so what I wanted to do with that work was to create a scenario where it felt like that stage apparatus had just sort of collapsed on itself, but the lights were still operational. But instead of, you know, going through the usual motions of highlighting the figure and amplifying that performance, they're sort of scattered in every direction. So what they end up doing is they end up highlighting and directing attention in a really dispersed way where there's no central point of focus. So the point of focus becomes the space that the audience occupies, like the space from which this kind of viewing and consuming of images originates. So that's, yeah, that was sort of the thinking behind the kind of like way that work was spatialized. And like to get like technical with it, it's like the lights are kind of, they're responding to the different frequencies and amplitudes and rhythms that are read in the song and then kind of like transcribed through the lights. Yeah.
When you say that, and I do want to get technical.
Yeah.
When you're talking about the frequencies, I'm curious, are you isolating any part of the composition?
Yeah. So with each, like with each song, or actually, let me think of how to explain this. So I have this lighting designer I work with, Josephine Wong, and typically when we work together, it's like the program and the form is sort of determined by the scale of the installation. And so with this work, we had a very simple sort of way of organizing the programming. So I just said, and I'm trying to remember precisely like how we arranged like the frequencies and things, but like each element of the sound would control a different movement of the lights. So like differences in frequency would control, for example, like the tilt of the lights, so how they tilted. Different levels of like amplitude, so that's just like loud, like how loud or soft something is, would affect the brightness of the
Mhm.
lights.
Wow.
Like a certain like certain rhythmic patterns would affect the like way that the lights panned. So there are these different functions for the lights that correspond to like particular characteristics of the sound. And so that like formula kind of was the guideline for the full 45-minute. Did I freeze? Oh wait, can you hear me?
It's almost like there's this further non protagonizing, like further divestment from the protagonist, because
Yeah,
I'm sure you could find
yeah.
Tina Turner acapellas.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But
Yeah,
and especially to think of her as so bound by the composition
yeah,
is such an interesting and solemn reflection of her, you know, of her presence and non-presence, you know.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because with Tina too, I mean, I just think it's so hard to not think of her, just the way that like the idea of Tina Turner has been cultivated in popular imagination as the queen of rock and roll. Like she's so inextricably tied to genre, like an extremely problematic, like racist genre that like really refused to acknowledge what she was doing as rock and roll, you know?
Yeah.
And or like for a long time like really resisted it. And so I've done like other projects where I sort of reflect on like the song River Deep Mountain High that she did with Phil Spector, which is just like such a like the perfect example of how regressive these categories of genre operate and like how that plays out in the way that media is distributed through like radio and record companies and record labels. But yeah, so the Tina thing is just, and even like this idea of performers, like pop performers in general, it's like so much of that persona is like just bound up in technology and media. It's like, you know, most of the time when we're experiencing something that's a live performance is heavily mediated, you know,
Right.
it's like coming through loudspeakers. There are backing tracks. There's
Right.
all this sort of like artifice. So yeah, it's like the boundaries between liveness and like a kind of mediated, you know, it's like, yeah.
I've been thinking a lot about these things
Mm,
as a pop star.
yeah,
Pop star, just
yeah.
the
And like what's the
distribution.
DJing stuff?
Huh?
The DJing stuff. We haven't even talked about that.
Oh, we have so much to talk about
There's so
and
much to talk about.
no more time, but I'll catch
Sorry,
you up.
everyone.
I'm gonna catch you up at step practice.
Yes.
All right, to our viewers, we thank you for joining us. Thank you, Kemi, for organizing
Yes.
this
Thank
Black
you.
Embodiment Studio artist and artist writer collabo.
Yeah, this is
This
fun.
has been a joy. It is the beginning of so many projects that I have written in my notes,
Yes.
and hope y'all got lots of value out of it. Closing
Yeah.
words, Nikita?
Yes. Thank you so much, Mandy Harris Williams, for being game. Thank you to Kemi, again, Black Embodiments crew. This was really, I mean, I'm just kind of buzzing. This is like really great. I love a good conversation. Um, hopefully, hopefully all the bad stuff got edited out. And if it didn't, what is bad anyway, really? Yeah, but we'll see you at step practice. I mean, I'll see you at step practice, and then maybe
Yeah,
people
and then there will
hear
be
about it.
tryouts in
There
the
will be
fall.
tryouts for sure. Keep an eye out for that
Yeah.
announcement on Instagram, Reddit, Twitter, to be deleted later.
All right, that's all, folks.
Right.
Thank you for joining us.
Bye.